I asked whether I could hold a naughty speech because most introductory speeches are just boring. And I said, yes, yes, please hold a naughty speech. So this speech is about 7 deadly sins. These were coined, I think, some 1500 years ago by Christian Catholic early founders. But if you look at them and you put between the one extreme also the other extreme, it also resembles, for example, the teaching of Confucius. Because what it really says is that every extreme is a problem. Always the middle way is the right way. So actually it is not only Christian, it's also beyond. Another thing about these is, okay, they may be 1500 years old, but if you read today's newspaper, you will see that most of them are still extremely popular and that there are regularly stories about people who commit all of them, really. Okay, now I have another set. I will not talk about these. I have another set. I have thought of what are the deadly sins in dealing with culture in a multicultural society. And they can be done by politicians, by business people, by scientists, by consultants, anybody else, and anybody in this group. Of course, I don't need to explain this here, but these are the people who don't commit those sins. But everybody who's not in this room is probably belongs to the group that commits them. So I have a list, and I will explain what I mean by them. First of all, unawareness. Now this is a quotation of a Scottish philosopher, David Hume, which is also in my book, so if you read my book well, you may have seen it. What do you think if you read it? What you'd say today is probably how extremely stupid. It only means that you recognize everybody else's culture except your own. There's the one thing. Hume was a Scot, and he talks about the English. Now, I'm not sure whether he includes himself there or not, but no. But apart from that, but my experience of unawareness comes from attending international conferences. And when you attend an international scientific conference, as a number of us will quite regularly do, and you are a bit culture sensitive, you will be aware that what people say is also a function of where they come from. A lecture by a German has some different characteristics, and if you have a discussion between a German and a French, and so you will recognize that. But be very careful using that argument in your discussions, because if you do that, it will polarize the audience. Some people will say, of course, I never thought of that. This is a revelation. And others will become furious. And this has nothing to do with the subject. And you're splitting up the audience. Okay, next one is ethnocentrism. Well, first of all, the most ethnocentric example everybody always uses is the Chinese word for China, Zhongguo, which means, some people say the Middle Kingdom, the empire in the middle, but in fact, the Chinese only say it that way, and there are other languages also where you have similar words, but I would say in most countries, and this applies to all of us, even to the Dutch, that implicitly, if we think of the center of the world, we think of our own place. And of course, the world is round, which is useful because every point on the globe is a center, but the point where we happen to come from tends to be the center. An example from my own field is cross-cultural studies, because if you look at the literature on cross-cultural studies, it is too often so that they are written by monolingual Americans. Now, the point about being monolingual is I don't claim that it's sufficient to speak more than one language to be multicultural, but I think it is very useful, it's necessary, And if you are not accustomed to express yourself in all but one language, then you are just limited also to understand culture. There is a famous saying by an American comic, if English was good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for me. And you see, this mentality is also still there. Amnesia. Amnesia is a medical term, people who get forgetful. And, well, more than one, actually, Dutch politicians claim that Western civilization is superior. Well, if you have a little bit of memory, even in my lifetime, I can come with examples where Western civilization is about the worst thing that happened to this world, I could say. But also politicians and leaders can commit amnesia and sort do their own damage. The fact that when I think back nowadays, I'm working a bit on my memories, and I'm working on World War II, and I'm realizing that the thing when it turned sour for the Germans is when they attacked Russia. And this is exactly what happened to Napoleon. So if Hitler would have any understanding of history, he would have known not to do this. But it happened again with George W. Bush, when he decided he wanted to pacify Afghanistan. You see what's happening there now. And he had just, even in his lifetime, he could have seen shortly before that exactly the same thing happened to the Russians, and before that the same thing happened to the Brits. So well, history is very, very important, and before you undertake any important decision, look what happened in history. Professional myopia, short-sightedness. This is two comments I collected in the course of my own work. The first is after I had given a talk about national cultures to an international conference of anthropologists. And my paper was submitted to the journal Current Anthropology. It was rejected there, although it had been a paper at the conference, but it had been accepted there. But this is what the reviewer said. This is, I'm afraid, quite a few anthropologists still would be able to make this type of comments. And the next one is one which I owe to a gentleman who likes very much to criticize me, and he said, well, this is what Immanuel Wallerstein said. And he gave me this quote. Mr. Wallerstein is about my age, so I think that Lazarsfeld and Hyman, they were still a bit older, he sat at their feet. And it's typically the idea that, okay, the way the disciplines in social science go is that there are some pillars, and if you belong to one pillar, you don't belong to the other pillar. And this is the way you have to look at the world. And well, he didn't realize that what I was doing was not exactly what his fathers, Lazarsfeld and Hyman, were doing. Conceptual mix-up. We use terms like culture, we look at terms like identity, as values, practices, and we have enormous discussions about it. In Holland, for those who are from Holland, remember that we had a tremendous discussion about identity here when our princess of Argentinian origin said something about the Dutch identity. And nobody thought of, first of all, asking what she meant and what everybody meant with identity, because in the discussion, everybody meant something else. But because all these are constructs, they don't exist like this desk exists, or you and I exist. They are things that only are made up by our minds. And this is a beautiful definition which I found a long time ago, but I cite it again and again from Teresa Levitin, an American social scientist. And she said that these are constructs, they are things that are not directly accessible to observation, but inferable. You can, in your mind, construct them from verbal statements and other behaviors. And then the second part, they are useful, they should be useful in predicting still other observable, measurable, verbal, non-verbal behaviors. Otherwise, no need to have them. Otherwise, they're completely redundant. So unless a construct is not only has an origin, but also a purpose, it can be used. Actually, they are tools to simplify an immensely complex world into parts which we can handle. Scientists have egos. Scientists are human, and we're all human. That's a nice feeling. In the natural sciences, there is a limit to what this can mean, because the kind of things they do with their intelligence is usually falsifiable. It's not verifiable. Falsifiable is the proper word. Since Karl Popper, you have to be able to prove that it is right or not right, and then if you make a statement, you can find whether that statement is correct or not. In the social sciences, unfortunately, this is not always the case. The social scientists leave a lot of room for ego boosting, and a lot of social scientists have also quite sizable egos. So what you see often in academic polemics, if you read the press, is that colleagues who are competitors, colleagues are seen as competitors, and competitors must be wrong, and competitors even, because they're wrong, they must be evil. Now, the interesting thing in the field of culture is that you can say that typically, the first representative of culture you meet in cross-cultural research is the researcher, her or himself. So all academic research is constrained by the culture of the researcher. And I don't mean research teams that are led by one particular person who sends out his disciples all over the world to collect data. I don't call that cross-cultural. Cross-cultural is when you compare the result of one independent researcher or research team with another. And the point is that because of this is an excellent reason for seeking synergy with others. In my own history, the fact that once upon a time I found results that differed from results found by a term that had worked mainly in East Asia, has been a reason for a major breakthrough because it showed that, in fact, from that point of view, from their point of view, they simply came up with things I would have never have thought of. And today you will learn that, in fact, some people also in this side of Asia also thought of the things, but they were not so obvious. So there is a very good reason to treat your colleagues not so much as competitors as maybe as colleagues, as people who have supplementary information. And then I come back to my quote from Teresa Levitin. The ultimate criterion is predicting observable and measurable verbal and non-verbal behaviors. And it is very well possible that for observing and predicting some behaviors, you need one kind of research, and for some other behavior, you need another type of research. So, because you need a different tool for different purposes. The last is level confusion. All culture presupposes a collective or a social system. Culture is a term that applies not to a single person, it applies to a collective, at least culture in the particular sense in which cross-cultural researchers use it. So, and the level should be specified. There is a specific level. You have national cultures, regional cultures, organizational cultures, occupational, generation cultures, family cultures, gender cultures. Individuals don't have cultures, individuals have personalities. And of course, there is a relationship between the two. And I've been lucky to be able to collaborate with Robert McCrae on the relationship between personality and culture, which is one of the most interesting, exciting pieces of research I've ever been involved in. You have to realize that if we talk about research results, and an example of that is dimensions, if you find dimensions, they apply to a particular level. Dimensions of national culture, they belong to the level of nations and they belong to anthropology. Dimensions of organizational culture belong to sociology. Dimensions of personality belong to psychology. So there are different disciplines, there are different concepts, there are different dimensions, and if you use one at the wrong level, then what you get is nonsense. Is you get instruments used for purposes they were not meant for. You use a hammer to operate on somebody's teeth. But this, you don't describe yourself, you describe where you feel at home. That's the culture question. If you describe yourself, you talk about your personality, okay? But if you want to know about your culture, you describe where do I feel at home. Well, these were some naughty remarks I had to make at the beginning, and I hope they give you material to come back to them today. And I'm very excited to hear what everybody is going to say this morning. I want to close with a famous citation. This is a citation also of a century ago, Edouard Herriot, the French president. And actually he was one of the founders of the European idea. La culture, c'est ce qui reste quand on a tout oublié. He may have meant it a little bit different, but it fits beautifully. But culture is what is left if you forgot all else. Culture is not here, culture is here. So we are talking about things that are here. Okay, have a very good and productive day.